clink of silverware against porcelain was the only sound in the room, until my father raised his glass with the air of a man about to deliver a blessing. The candles flickered, throwing warm light over dishes I had spent hours preparing, and I was bracing myself for one of his usual toasts, something about family, tradition, or the importance of sticking together. But instead, with a smile as casual as if he were announcing the weather, he said the words that would hollow me out. "We've decided that Michael and Sophie will move into Abigail's duplex. Rent-free, of course." My fork froze halfway to my lips, my hand trembling, the food slipping back onto the plate with a dull thud. For a moment, my ears rang, drowning out the world, until my brother's smug smile cut through the haze like a blade. I wanted to laugh, to believe this was some sort of sick joke, but the silence around the table confirmed it was no jest. My mother lowered her eyes to her plate, avoiding me, her hands fidgeting with the napkin in her lap, as if she could hide behind its folded corners. Michael leaned back in his chair like a king receiving a kingdom, and Sophie's lips curled into that subtle, poisonous smirk I had come to know so well, a smile that said she had been the puppeteer behind every string. My father, oblivious or unwilling to care about the storm building inside me, continued sipping his wine as if he had merely offered me the chance to pass the salt. The weight of the moment pressed against my chest, until I could hardly breathe. The duplex wasn't just property to me. It was the monument of years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights working double shifts, of meals skipped so I could afford repairs, of every ounce of independence I had clawed back after a lifetime of being overlooked. That house was my proof that I was more than the shadow Michael always made me feel like. And now, with one sentence, my father had stripped it of meaning, turned it into another handout for my brother, the golden child who never had to earn anything, not even respect. The betrayal wasn't just in his words. It was in the way my family stared at me like this decision had already been carved in stone. I stared at Michael, his smile widening as he caught my eye, daring me to protest. His arrogance filled the room like smoke, choking me. He always had that expression, the smug, self-satisfied look of someone who knew he would win no matter what, because someone else would always bend the rules for him. Sophie reached for his hand, squeezing it with mock tenderness, but her eyes never left mine. There was triumph in her gaze, the satisfaction of a woman who had orchestrated a victory long before the battle began. My blood boiled, but my body refused to move, trapped between fury and disbelief. I wanted to scream, to slam my fists on the table, to shatter the fragile plates just to remind them that I was not invisible, not weak, not a vessel for their endless favoritism. But the words caught in my throat like barbed wire. I could already hear the accusations they'd hurl at me if I spoke. Selfish, ungrateful, unloving. And so I swallowed my rage, tasting iron as I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from breaking apart in front of them. Silence became my only shield, though it felt more like a coffin being nailed shut around me. My father mistook my silence for agreement. "Good," he said, nodding with satisfaction, as if the matter had already been settled. He turned to Michael, his voice softening, his pride barely concealed. "It'll give you and Sophie the fresh start you need, son. A stable home, a chance to build something lasting." His words twisted like knives in my stomach, because hadn't I built something lasting? Hadn't I spent years proving I was worthy of the same pride he lavished on Michael without effort? My own triumph, my own stability, was now nothing more than a gift he could reassign to his favorite child. Michael chuckled, low and smug, the sound bubbling like oil. "Thanks, Dad. You have no idea what this means to us." His eyes darted to me again, full of mock sympathy, as if he pitied me for not understanding that this was for the greater good. Sophie added sweetly, "Yes, Abigail, we're so grateful. We promise to take good care of it." Her voice dripped with false gratitude, every syllable a reminder that she had won, that I had been cornered into silence. My stomach churned as their words piled on top of one another, building a prison out of politeness and manipulation. I tried to steady my breath, to find some anchor amid the chaos, but the walls of the dining room seemed to close in, pressing me against my chair until I thought I might suffocate. The chandelier above flickered as if mocking me, its crystals reflecting a distorted version of myself, silent, powerless, betrayed. I glanced at my mother again, hoping for even the smallest lifeline, a glance of solidarity, a flicker of doubt, but she never looked up, never moved to stop the cruelty unfolding. Her silence was louder than any accusation, a quiet betrayal that burned deeper than words ever could. Inside, though, something shifted. Beneath the weight of humiliation and fury, a spark caught fire, small but defiant. They thought they had me cornered, that I would fold under their pressure like I always had. But this time, the fury would not stay buried. I clenched my hands in my lap, nails digging into my palms until I felt the sting of pain. They thought they knew me, thought I would swallow my pride again, and let them trample over the one thing I had fought hardest for. They were wrong. I wasn't ready to speak yet, but a storm was brewing, and when it broke, it would not be me who drowned. I was 8 when I first noticed the imbalance, though I couldn't yet name it. Michael had knocked over a vase in the living room, shattering it into jagged shards across the floor. I remember the sharp gasp that escaped my lips, fearing my father's anger. But instead of scolding him, our parents laughed it off. "Boys will be boys," my mother said, gathering the pieces carefully, while Michael grinned with no hint of remorse. Later that night, I tripped in the hallway and accidentally tore the hem of the curtain. I was met not with laughter, but with disappointment, a scolding so sharp it stung my ears. It was a small thing, almost forgettable, but in the fabric of my childhood, it became the first thread of a pattern that never unraveled. Michael was the golden child, and his every step seemed bathed in light that I was not allowed to touch. His drawings were praised as genius, while mine were folded away without a glance. His mediocre grades were celebrated as potential, while my highest marks were brushed aside with the phrase, "That's what we expect from you, Abigail." Expectations became my shadow, following me relentlessly, while Michael basked in the comfort of endless indulgence. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a declaration of roles. He was the one to be lifted, and I was the one to carry. Even as a child, I felt the sting of invisibility. Birthdays became another cruel reminder. Michael's parties were grand. Balloons, cakes stacked with 3 tiers, gifts piled so high they nearly hid him from view. Mine, by contrast, were quiet affairs, often forgotten until the last moment. One year, I received a single gift hastily wrapped, a book that had clearly been pulled from a shelf already read by someone else. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need the spectacle, but the truth was harder to ignore. I ached to be seen, to be celebrated, to be valued for more than just my ability to endure. That hunger stayed with me long after the candles were blown out. Even at school, the divide followed us. Teachers who knew our family name often treated Michael with indulgence, assuming his charm came from the same charisma our father carried. I, however, was expected to be the diligent one, the reliable daughter who needed no help. I became the girl who blended into the background, whose quiet excellence was invisible compared to Michael's loud mediocrity. He stumbled through life and was applauded for standing, while I climbed mountains and was told it was only natural. It built something dangerous in me, a fire that whispered I would have to carve my worth out of stone, alone. As we grew older, the disparity only widened. Michael would come home late, the stench of alcohol clinging to his clothes, and my parents would sigh with worry, then excuse him with tender words. Meanwhile, if I arrived home late from studying or work, I was met with suspicion, with lectures about responsibility and propriety. I learned that my efforts were not measured with fairness, but with a double-edged scale that weighed me down while lifting him up. Each injustice carved deeper into me, until all I had left was resolve. If no one else would see my worth, I would prove it to myself. I threw myself into work as soon as I was able. Babysitting, tutoring, waiting tables. I took every opportunity to save money, to build something of my own. My parents would glance at me and say, "Don't work yourself too hard, Abigail." But their words were hollow. They never stopped Michael from lounging, from depending on others, from living without consequence. And so, I wore my exhaustion as a badge of honor. Every dollar I saved felt like rebellion. Every night I collapsed into bed with aching muscles felt like victory. I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing to escape. Michael, meanwhile, perfected the art of charm. He didn't need to work. People wanted to hand him what he hadn't earned. Teachers overlooked his laziness. Friends forgave his cruelty. And my parents showered him with forgiveness, no matter how reckless his actions became. He knew it too. He wielded their favoritism like a weapon, smirking when I was scolded, smirking when I was overlooked, smirking because he knew that no matter what, he was untouchable. That smirk, the same one he wore at the dinner table years later, haunted my childhood. It was the reminder that my silence fed his power, but silence became my training ground. Every slight, every dismissal, every stolen opportunity hardened me, chiseling me into something my family couldn't recognize. They thought they were burying me under Michael's light, but in truth, they were forging me in shadow. My hunger for independence was not born from ambition alone. It was born from survival. I vowed that one day, I would have something no one could strip from me, something that belonged to me entirely. And when I finally claimed it, when I stood inside the duplex I had bought with my own hands, I believed, foolishly, that the battle was over. I had no idea the war was only beginning. The first paycheck I ever earned felt like gold in my hands. It wasn't much. The crumpled bills from babysitting and the coins I had saved in a small jar under my bed, but it represented freedom. Every cent was a brick in the invisible wall I was building between myself and the dependency my family had designed for me. While my friends spent weekends at the movies, buying clothes or wasting money on fleeting pleasures, I kept mine locked away, scribbling numbers in a notebook where each total meant I was one step closer to escape. Independence was not an idea for me. It was a necessity, a lifeline, the only proof that I was more than the shadow cast by Michael's glowing image. By the time I was in college, my savings had become both a source of pride and a cage. I skipped parties, declined vacations, and wore shoes until they frayed at the edges. People whispered about how serious I was, how little fun I allowed myself, but none of them understood that fun had always been rationed in my house. I wasn't deprived because of poverty. I was deprived because every scrap of attention and indulgence was funneled toward Michael. So I poured my hunger into something solid, something lasting. With each job I took, tutoring during the day, waiting tables at night, grading papers for professors at dawn, I felt myself inch closer to a dream no one else believed I could achieve. The duplex came to me like a miracle, though it was one I had bled for. I still remember standing outside its weathered brick exterior, the for sale sign leaning awkwardly against the post. It wasn't grand, not like the houses in magazines, but it was mine. I could see the potential in the chipped paint, in the creaking floorboards, in the garden that had been left wild. Others might have dismissed it as too much work, but I saw in it the same reflection I saw in myself, underestimated, overlooked, but capable of becoming something strong and unshakable with enough care. When I signed the papers, my hands trembled not from fear, but from triumph. Owning that duplex became my greatest accomplishment, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Every scar on my hands from scrubbing, every blister from hauling furniture, every hour spent learning to patch walls or sand floors, was a declaration of independence. I had built this sanctuary with sacrifices no one else could comprehend. To me, it was more than a building. It was proof that I could exist outside of their neglect. Proof that I was capable of forging a life where my worth wasn't measured against Michael's failures. Proof that survival could transform into triumph. But triumph had its cost. Relationships slipped through my fingers like water, because no one wanted to compete with my relentless focus. I turned down dates, missed weddings, and skipped reunions because rent, repairs, and savings always came first. Friends accused me of being too guarded, too obsessed, and sometimes, late at night, I wondered if they were right. I wondered what I had lost in chasing the dream of freedom. There were nights when loneliness pressed against me as heavily as exhaustion. Nights when I longed for someone to notice the weight I carried. Yet even then, I clung to my duplex. It was the one thing that never abandoned me. Michael, meanwhile, stumbled forward in his life like a man cushioned by pillows. Every mistake he made was softened by my parents' excuses, every debt erased with their money, every reckless decision met with indulgent laughter. He never worried about rent, never stayed up wondering if he'd have enough for groceries. He floated while I clawed my way up cliffs with my bare hands. And what enraged me most wasn't his ease. It was the smugness that came with it, the way he seemed to believe he deserved all that comfort, simply because he was Michael. He knew nothing of hunger, and yet he acted as though he was the one feasting on life. I often wondered if my parents realized how deep the wound ran, or if they simply didn't care. To them, I was the responsible one, the daughter who needed no help, no encouragement, no recognition. It was Michael who needed their constant support, their endless safety nets. I had spent years trying to earn their approval, to be noticed, only to realize that they had already chosen who would be cherished and who would be used. That realization cut deep, but it also liberated me. I stopped chasing their acknowledgement and began building my own. My duplex became my applause, my validation, my reward. And yet, no matter how much I worked, No matter how hard I tried to put distance between us, Michael's shadow followed me into that home. He never said it aloud, but I could feel it in his eyes whenever he visited. The entitlement, the quiet calculation, as though my home was nothing more than another toy he would eventually be handed. He carried our parents' indulgence like armor, convinced that life would bend to him simply because it always had. I saw the storm coming, even then, but I told myself I was ready. I believed that what I had built with sweat and sacrifice was untouchable. I didn't yet know how wrong I was. The first time Michael showed up at my duplex unannounced, I told myself it was harmless. He leaned casually against the doorway, his arms crossed like he owned the place, and grinned in that way that made me feel 12 years old again. Small, dismissed, invisible. Sophie followed behind him, her heels clicking on my wooden floor as if she were already testing its soundness, her eyes scanning the rooms with a quiet hunger. They didn't ask to come in. They simply walked past me, commenting on the space, remarking about how perfect the layout was for their family. I stood frozen, clutching the rag I had been cleaning with, unable to shake the sensation that something sacred was being invaded. It didn't stop there. Soon they were appearing almost weekly, sometimes with the excuse of just being in the neighborhood, other times without pretense. Sophie would open cabinets, tug at curtains, and once, she even measured the living room with a tape measure, humming under her breath as if this was already her home. Michael joked about where they'd put the baby's crib, how they might repaint the walls, how Abby could crash on the couch whenever she wanted. Every word was dipped in entitlement, delivered with the smug certainty of someone who believed the decision had already been made. I wanted to scream, to throw them out, but instead I bit my lip until I tasted blood, my silence the only shield I had left. Then came the phone calls from my parents. My father's voice carried that firm, unquestionable tone he had perfected long ago. "Abigail, your brother needs stability. You know how hard things have been for him." My mother's voice chimed in softer, but sharper somehow, her words like threads of guilt tying knots around my chest. "Family comes first, darling. You wouldn't let your brother struggle when you have more than enough. More than enough." Those 3 words burned into me like fire, erasing years of sacrifices, as though my blood, sweat, and loneliness were irrelevant simply because I had managed to succeed without their help. At night, I replayed their voices over and over, wrestling with the poison they poured into me. Was I selfish? Was I cruel? The questions gnawed at me, dragging me into sleepless hours where the duplex walls felt closer than ever, as though even my home was questioning my right to keep it. Loyalty tugged at me like a chain, reminding me of childhood dinners, of my parents' tired faces, of the commandment to honor one's family. But dignity roared louder, a voice I had spent years cultivating, whispering that I had earned this place, that I was not an obstacle to Michael's comfort, but a woman who had fought for the right to finally rest in her own hard-won peace. Michael's arrogance grew bolder each time he stepped foot inside my space. One evening, I found him in the backyard without telling me he was coming, cigarette smoke curling into the air, while Sophie scrolled on her phone on my porch swing. When I asked what they were doing, he waved me off with a laugh. "Relax, Abby. It's going to be ours soon anyway. Mom and Dad said so." I felt my knees weaken, rage and despair crashing together inside me. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him, force him to see me, force him to remember that I was not a servant in this story, but his equal. Yet his smirk reminded me of every year I had spent being erased. What hurt most was my mother's silence during those moments when I tried to defend myself. She never openly sided with Michael during conversations, but she never defended me either. She would sit quietly in the background, eyes downcast, as though she were rehearsing the art of not being complicit while still enabling the injustice. My father, however, carried no such hesitation. He cornered me during one Sunday dinner and said, "You need to think about what kind of sister you want to be remembered as." The weight of his words fell like a gavel, a judgment on my soul, and I walked away from that table trembling, knowing the trial had already begun, and I was the only one accused. Inside me, a storm raged. I loved my family, or at least the idea of what family should have been. I had carried their neglect like a wound that never closed, but I still longed for their approval, their warmth, their acknowledgement that I was more than just the responsible one. And yet, as their voices pressed me harder, I felt something shifting inside me. It was a quiet defiance, a whisper growing louder each day that said, "If you give in now, you will lose not just your home, but yourself." I wasn't ready to face them yet, but I knew, with the certainty of a woman standing on the edge of a cliff, that a confrontation was coming. So I waited, biting back my anger, storing every insult, every smirk, every manipulative word like ammunition. They thought they had me cornered, that I would fold as I always had, that guilt would weaken my spine into obedience. But the duplex had taught me something they could never understand, that survival requires not only sacrifice, but also resistance. And for the first time in my life, I began to consider that maybe I wasn't just fighting for a home. Maybe I was fighting to finally break the chain that had bound me to their favoritism all along. It started with Sophie's little comments, tossed into the air like feathers but landing on me like stones. "We'll have to change these curtains. They're far too plain for our new place." She said it with a laugh, sipping her coffee at my kitchen table as though she had already signed the deed herself. Michael chuckled beside her, not even pretending to correct her. I felt my chest tighten, my fingers curling against the chair. Each casual word from her lips was a thread weaving a web around my duplex, a home I had poured my life into, now being stripped piece by piece in their imagination. Her tone was always sweet, her eyes wide and innocent, but underneath it all, I could hear the blade. She had mastered the art of manipulation, planting images of a future where my home belonged to them while making it seem harmless, playful, almost inevitable. When I asked why she kept calling it our new place, she tilted her head and replied, "Well, that's what your parents said, isn't it?" The implication was clear. I was unreasonable for resisting, stubborn for not surrendering. I wanted to snap back, to tell her that words couldn't claim walls, but the way she smiled at me made me feel as though she had already won. Michael, meanwhile, basked in his growing entitlement like a man stepping into a throne he had never earned. He strutted through the duplex, boasting about where he would set up his office, how the basement would be perfect for storage, how the neighborhood was exactly right for raising a child. His arrogance burned me, but it also exposed something deeper, desperation hiding beneath the bravado. He kept repeating how perfect it all was, as though convincing himself that this gift was his salvation. I began noticing the cracks in his jokes, the way his laughter came too quickly, his smile stretching a little too far. One evening, while Sophie was in the bathroom, Michael leaned against the counter and let out a sigh that didn't sound rehearsed. He muttered something about the bills stacking up and not knowing how much longer we can keep afloat. His voice cracked, just slightly, before he caught himself, standing straighter, flashing that smug grin again. But I had heard it. Beneath his arrogance, there was fear. Fear of failure, fear of losing face, fear of the truth leaking out. For the first time, I realized they weren't just greedy. They were drowning, and they saw my duplex as their life raft. Sophie returned and the mask slipped right back on. She spoke about repainting walls, choosing new furniture, turning one room into a nursery. Her voice was sugar-coated, but her eyes darted toward Michael with an edge that betrayed urgency. I watched the way he avoided her gaze, the way his shoulders stiffened under her words. There was more than entitlement here. There was pressure, a silent war between them that played out in the pauses of their sentences. I began to wonder whether Sophie's insistence was not just greed, but survival. My suspicions deepened when I caught sight of a letter sticking out of Sophie's bag. It was only a corner, but the bold print of "Final Notice" was unmistakable. She shoved it back quickly when she saw me glance, her smile tightening, her chatter doubling in speed. That moment lodged in my mind like a shard of glass. They weren't just circling my duplex because it was convenient. They needed it, badly. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my parents probably didn't know the full extent of their troubles. Sophie was too careful, too polished, too determined to keep the performance going. I began piecing together the story in my head. The lavish trips they'd bragged about, the fancy dinners they posted online, the designer clothes Sophie always wore. They hadn't been luxuries born from success, but illusions hiding collapse. Their pride wouldn't allow them to admit it openly, but their desperation leaked through the cracks. Michael's forced laugh, Sophie's sharpness when she thought no one was listening, the hidden letters they pretended didn't exist. And my duplex wasn't just a home to them. It was their last chance at holding together the facade they had built for years. That night, lying awake in my bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt a mix of anger and pity. Anger at their shameless entitlement, pity at the thought of how far they had fallen. But what gnawed at me most was the realization that this wasn't just about a duplex. This was about survival, power, and the way desperation can turn family into predators. I clenched the sheets in my fists and whispered to myself, they won't take this from me. Yet deep down, I knew the battle had only just begun, and that the truth, once revealed, would unravel more than any of us were ready to face. The living room became a battlefield the moment I opened my mouth. I had rehearsed the words in my head for days, but when they came out, they spilled sharp and trembling. You're taking advantage of me. The silence that followed was deafening, like the air had been sucked from the room. My father's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the arm of the chair as if steadying himself against a storm. My mother's eyes narrowed, her lips pursed in a look I knew too well. Not disappointment in them, but in me, always me, for daring to speak, for daring to resist. Richard was the first to fire back. Selfish. That's what you are, he spat, his voice trembling with a righteous anger I'd heard directed at others, but never so raw toward me. Your brother has a family. He needs support. And you, Abigail, sitting here clutching what you have like a miser, refusing to share. Do you think that's what family means? His words tore at me, not just because of their cruelty, but because of the weight behind them. He believed it. He had always believed it. My worth had never been measured by what I built, but by how quickly I could surrender it. Martha followed, her voice sharp but cool, slicing more deeply because she hid her anger behind civility. We raised you better than this, to put others before yourself, to care for blood before you care for money. It saddens me to see how cold you've become, Abigail. All that education, all that independence you boast about, and yet you've forgotten the simplest lesson, generosity. Her words were coated in the poison of moral superiority. She didn't see my sacrifices, the nights I starved to save, the years I clawed my way into stability. To her, my independence was arrogance, my boundary was cruelty. Michael leaned back in his chair, his smugness filling every corner of the room. Oh, come on, Abigail, he sneered. It's not like you earned that duplex by pulling gold out of the ground. You got lucky. A bank gave you a loan, the market worked in your favor, and now you act like you're some kind of self-made success. Newsflash, you're not. His laugh was hollow, but it cut me like glass. He wanted to erase me, to strip me of the sweat and sacrifice that had built everything I had. And for a moment, he almost succeeded. Then came Sophie, the master of barbed kindness. She folded her hands delicately in her lap and smiled, that infuriating, polished smile. We're not trying to take anything from you, Abigail. We're just trying to build a future. Isn't that what you'd want for us? For Michael's child to grow up in a stable home? Her words dripped with honey, but her eyes glinted with malice. Every syllable was meant to make me look like the monster, the cold aunt, who would deny her nephew a roof. I could feel the invisible daggers in her tone, piercing me deeper than Michael's open scorn ever could. The walls closed in on me as their voices overlapped. My father's rage, my mother's scolding, Michael's mockery, Sophie's poisoned sweetness. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my words drowned under theirs, every attempt at reason smothered by the chorus of accusations. I felt myself shrinking in that room, smaller and smaller, as though I were once again the overlooked daughter at the dinner table, my opinions dismissed, my worth measured only in what I could give away. My chest ached, my throat burned, and still they pressed on, unrelenting. Finally, I snapped. Enough, I shouted, the word ripping out of me like a tear in fabric. Their voices fell silent, but their eyes burned into me, 4 against 1, judgment wrapped in flesh. My hands shook, but I forced myself to stand. You will not shame me for protecting what I worked for. You will not twist this into generosity when it's exploitation. And you, I said, my eyes landing on Michael, don't you dare diminish what I've built just because you've wasted every chance you were given. For the first time, I saw the smirk falter on his face, but the power of that moment was short-lived. My father's voice returned, lower now, seething with disappointment that felt heavier than any scream. If this is who you've become, Abigail, maybe you don't belong in this family. The words gutted me. I staggered back, unable to breathe, my vision blurring. I felt the hot sting of tears, but I refused to let them see me collapse in front of them. Without another word, I turned, grabbed my coat, and left. The door slammed behind me, echoing through the house like a final verdict. In the cold night air, I finally let the tears fall, bitter, burning, unstoppable. The night after the confrontation, I found myself driving without direction, the city lights blurring through the windshield as tears clouded my eyes. My chest still ached from my father's words, each syllable echoing like a gavel. Maybe you don't belong in this family. I wanted to scream, to curse, to rage at the injustice of it all, but my voice was trapped inside me. Somehow, almost by instinct, I ended up at Eleanor's doorstep. My aunt opened the door with her familiar warmth, her presence steady and grounding, and without a word I collapsed into her arms, trembling. She held me as though she had expected this moment all along. We sat in her kitchen, the faint scent of chamomile tea filling the air, the silence thick but comforting. Eleanor didn't press me to explain. She never did. She simply looked at me with those perceptive eyes that had always seen more than I wanted to admit. When I finally spoke, my words poured out like broken glass, cutting with every confession. I told her everything: the dinner, the confrontation, the cruelty of my parents, Michael's mocking tone, Sophie's poisoned smile. I confessed the shame of leaving in tears, of feeling smaller than I had in years. Eleanor listened, her hands folded, her face calm, but her gaze burned with an unspoken knowing. When I finished, she leaned forward, her voice low, deliberate. "Abigail, you cannot let appearances fool you. People wear masks, even family, especially family, and those who shout the loudest about love and sacrifice are often the ones hiding greed beneath it." Her words struck me harder than I expected, because they mirrored what I had always felt but never dared to articulate. My family's lectures about loyalty had always been laced with control, their calls for generosity steeped in entitlement. Eleanor's voice made it undeniable. It wasn't love they wanted, it was ownership. I swallowed hard, my fingers twisting in my lap. But what can I do, Eleanor? They're all against me. They act like the duplex is already theirs, like I'm just a selfish obstacle in the way. And maybe, my voice faltered, shame bubbling up. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't deserve it. Eleanor's sharp laugh startled me, not mocking, but almost incredulous. Not deserve it? You earned it, Abigail. Every hour, every sacrifice, every tear you shed to build that home into something stable, it is yours. Don't you ever let anyone rewrite that truth. Her voice was fire, and for the first time in days, I felt warmth ignite inside me. But then her tone softened, more cautious. Still, you should not rely on what you assume. I remember something. Years ago, when you first signed those papers, you brought me copies to look over. Do you recall that? I blinked, the memory faint but stirring. She continued. There was something unusual about them. A clause, a signature, something off. You dismissed it then, said it was just legal jargon. But Abigail, maybe it wasn't. The room seemed to tilt around me as her words sank in. The duplex, my sanctuary, my victory, was suddenly laced with a shadow of uncertainty. Images flashed in my mind, that thick stack of documents, my young, tired hands flipping through them with more exhaustion than understanding. I remembered Eleanor's gentle frown as she scanned a page, her finger tapping something I had brushed off. It doesn't matter, I had said at the time. It's just paperwork. But what if it did matter? What if buried in those pages was a truth none of us had acknowledged? My stomach twisted with equal parts fear and hope. Maybe my duplex was not the easy prize my family believed it to be. Maybe the foundation beneath their entitlement wasn't as solid as they thought. Eleanor reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. Go back. Review everything. Do not take their word, or even your memory, as fact. Find the truth for yourself, and when you do, you'll know how to act. Her steady confidence seeped into me like medicine, quieting the storm in my chest. I realized then that this was more than a battle over property. It was a battle over identity, over whether I had the strength to stand against years of conditioning. Eleanor's wisdom was both shield and sword, arming me for the fight I hadn't realized I was already in. That night, as I drove back to my empty duplex, my mind wouldn't stop racing. I could almost hear Eleanor's voice repeating, "Appearances hide truths." What truths lay buried in my paperwork, in the foundation of the home I fought so hard for? The thought sent shivers down my spine, equal parts dread and anticipation. I unlocked the door, stepping into the quiet that felt less like solitude and more like preparation. Tomorrow I would dig. Tomorrow I would know. And tomorrow, for the first time, I might hold the one thing my family never expected me to have, the upper hand. The second family dinner came like a trap, disguised in the familiar comfort of roasted chicken and Martha's practiced table setting. I should have known better, The invitation carried the weight of obligation, and every instinct in me screamed that it was a setup. Still, I went, foolishly clinging to some hope that civility might prevail. The moment I entered, Michael's smug smile confirmed everything. This wasn't a meal. It was an ambush. Sophie sat beside him, her arms folded, her lips curled with the kind of satisfaction that only comes when someone believes the game is already won. My stomach twisted, but I took my seat, bracing for the inevitable blow. Dinner began in strained politeness. Forks clinked against plates, but conversation felt staged, every word a rehearsed line. My father Richard sat at the head of the table, his presence heavier than usual, as though he had already decided the outcome of tonight's performance. Martha barely spoke, her eyes darting nervously between us, but she never defended me. She never had. Michael dominated the conversation, dropping casual comments about his future space in the duplex, as if possession was already guaranteed. Sophie added little barbs cloaked in sweetness, remarking about decor ideas and the children's excitement. Each word stabbed like needles, and I clenched my jaw, swallowing my fury. Finally, Richard cleared his throat and lifted his glass. The same gesture that had destroyed the last dinner. "Abigail," he said, his tone firm, rehearsed. "We've talked it over, and it's time you make the sacrifice for the family. Your brother needs stability. That duplex, it's the right choice. He deserves it." The words landed like iron, and the sound of deserves rang in my ears until it felt unbearable. My fork froze in midair, my appetite gone. Michael leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk stretching wider across his face. Sophie reached for his hand, her smugness radiating. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to run out of the room, but I sat there, trembling, my rage bubbling dangerously beneath the surface. "Sacrifice?" I whispered, my voice tight, barely audible. Richard nodded, mistaking my restraint for weakness. "Yes, that's what family does. Michael has children, responsibilities. You're single, Abigail. You can afford to be generous." The words sliced into me, their cruelty masked as logic. My mother stared down at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. In that silence, I felt utterly alone, a stranger among the people meant to love me most. Michael chose that moment to strike, leaning forward with mock sympathy. "It's not that hard, Abby. You've always had it easier than you think. Let us have the duplex, and you can move on. We'll make better use of it anyway." His words dripped with entitlement, a twisted rewriting of history where my sacrifices became nothing but excess. Sophie chuckled softly, adding, "It's really for the best. You'll thank us later." My hands tightened around my glass so hard I thought it might shatter. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples, a storm building with no escape. That storm broke when Richard slammed his hand down on the table, the sound reverberating through my chest. "Enough hesitation, Abigail. This is decided. Your brother deserves the duplex. Don't make this harder than it has to be." His voice thundered like a judge delivering a sentence, final and absolute. I stared at him, my father, the man who had never once stood on my side, and something inside me cracked. Years of swallowing silence, of bowing my head, of playing the dutiful daughter, all combusted in that single moment. My hands shook, not with fear, but with fury long overdue. "I've had enough," I said, my voice steady but sharp as glass. The room fell into stunned silence. "You sit here, dictating my life, rewriting my story, erasing my sacrifices as if they meant nothing. You think this duplex is yours to hand out, like a prize for the favored child, but you're wrong." I looked directly at Michael, his smirk faltering for the first time. Sophie's laughter froze mid-smile. My father's eyes narrowed, but he leaned back, sensing something shifting beyond his control. My breath came fast, but my voice did not waver. "You think you've already won, that you've trapped me, but hear me clearly. It's not yours to give, and it's not mine to lose." The words hung heavy in the air, cryptic and defiant. Michael's brows knitted in confusion. Sophie's confidence flickered, and even Richard's hand twitched against the tablecloth. I didn't explain, not yet. Let them wonder, let them stew in doubt. For the first time in years, I saw a shadow of fear creep into their expressions, and in that moment, power, fragile, flickering, but real, shifted into my hands. Silence filled the room after my words, an almost suffocating pause where no one dared move. Michael's smirk was gone, replaced with an uncertain twitch of his lips, as though he wasn't sure whether to laugh or rage. Sophie's fork clinked against her plate, her composure cracking. Richard, my father, looked at me with a hard glare, as though trying to crush me into compliance through sheer force of will. But I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I had been carrying for weeks, my secret weapon. My hands shook slightly, but my voice was calm when I placed it on the table. Since you all insist on talking about what's mine, maybe it's time you see the truth. Michael laughed nervously, his arrogance trying to recover. What truth, Abigail? That you're selfish? That you don't care about family? His voice rose, his words sharp, but hollow. I slid the papers across the table toward my father, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Sophie leaned in, her manicured fingers snatching the deed before Richard could. She unfolded it quickly, her eyes scanning the lines. Her confident smirk faded, her lips parting in disbelief. "What is this?" she muttered, voice cracking. Richard reached for the paper, and as he read, his face paled. Michael leaned over his shoulder, his expression hardening into confusion. "It's the deed," I said, my tone cutting through the tension. "And as you can see, my name isn't the only one on it." Michael's eyes darted to me, incredulous. "What do you mean?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger and desperation. I stood taller, my chest rising with the first real breath I'd taken all evening. "It means the duplex was never mine alone. It belongs to me and Eleanor. We co-own it. Every brick, every window, every piece of it." The words rang like thunder. Sophie gasped, shaking her head violently. "No, that's not possible. You're lying." But even she knew the truth was there, printed in black and white. Right on cue, Eleanor stepped forward from the doorway, her calm presence silencing the room. They hadn't noticed her arrive, but I had asked her to be there, to witness, to protect me if it came to this. Her silver hair framed her stern face, her eyes sharp with both disappointment and steel. "She's not lying," Eleanor said, her voice steady, commanding. "I signed with Abigail when she bought the duplex. We agreed on it years ago, but I kept it quiet until she was ready to stand on her own feet. Now it's time the truth comes out." The weight of her words settled over the table like a verdict. Michael's face twisted into anger. "You can't do this. This isn't fair." He shoved his chair back, fists clenched, his temper boiling over, but Eleanor didn't even blink. "What's unfair, Michael, is that you've buried yourself in debt and thought you could escape responsibility by stealing what isn't yours. You wanted to use Abigail's home as a lifeline, but you forgot one thing. It's not just Abigail's. It's mine too, and I'll never let you or Sophie poison it with your greed." Michael's breath caught, and for once, he had no smug comeback. Sophie tried to recover, her voice syrupy and false. "Eleanor, we only wanted a safe place for the children. You can't expect us to live in constant struggle while Abigail enjoys—" Eleanor cut her off sharply, her eyes blazing. "Don't play innocent with me. I know about the accounts you drained, the money you gambled away under Michael's name. I know about the loans you've hidden from his parents, and the creditors knocking at your door. You wanted the duplex not for your children, but as collateral, as protection for your own mistakes. Don't insult us by pretending otherwise." Sophie's mask shattered, her face hardening into silent fury. Richard slammed the table again, desperate to regain control. "This is family business, Eleanor. You have no right to interfere." But Eleanor leaned forward, her voice sharper than his authority. "I have every right. My name is on that deed. I am family to Abigail, whether you like it or not. And unlike you, Richard, I won't stand by while she's exploited. You've spent years favoring Michael, indulging his every failure, while Abigail carried the burden of her own success alone. No more." For the first time, Richard had no words. His authority crumbled under the weight of Eleanor's truth. Michael sank back into his chair, his face pale, his arrogance stripped bare. Sophie sat rigid beside him, her nails digging into her palms, but even she was silent now. Martha quietly dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, unable to deny what had been revealed. I watched them all, feeling a rush of both vindication and sorrow. This was the family I had bled for, the family I had once longed to please. Now, stripped of their illusions, they looked small, fragile, almost pitiful. The silence that followed wasn't victory alone. It was mourning for what could never be repaired. And in that silence, Eleanor placed her hand over mine. "The truth has a way of burning everything down," she whispered softly, so only I could hear. "But sometimes that's what it takes to start again." I nodded, my heart heavy yet unshackled. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this battle. The duplex wasn't just a house. It was a line drawn in the sand, proof that I wasn't powerless. And as I looked at my family's broken faces, I knew the reckoning had only begun. The room felt empty after the storm, though every eye still lingered on me, searching for weakness I no longer had. Michael slumped in his chair, his smugness evaporated, replaced by a brittle uncertainty that had never touched him before. Sophie's face was pale, her carefully constructed confidence cracked, and she gathered her things without a word, storming out in a flurry of anger and humiliation. My parents, Richard and Martha, sat frozen, their faces pale as if someone had pulled the rug from beneath their authority. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every injustice, every overlooked effort, every dismissive word that had haunted my life. But for the first time, I felt calm, resolute, like the tide had turned. Michael looked up at me, his anger simmering but now edged with fear. "Abigail, you can't just—" I cut him off sharply, my voice steady, unwavering. "No, Michael. This ends here. You will never manipulate me, bully me, or assume my sacrifices are yours to claim again. The duplex is not a bargaining chip, not a lifeline for your failures. It is mine, Eleanor's, and we will protect it. Understand that clearly." His mouth opened, trying to form words, but nothing emerged. I could see him registering that the old power dynamic was gone. I had drawn a line, and nothing in him could erase it. Richard attempted to intervene, his voice trembling. "Abigail, you're overreacting. Family means compromise." I shook my head, holding up the deed Eleanor had shown them. "Compromise does not mean erasing me, Father. Compromise does not mean rewarding entitlement over effort. You spent years favoring Michael, excusing his laziness, indulging his every whim, while I worked to build my own life. That stops now. No more hiding behind tradition. No more pretending favoritism is love." Martha sat silent, her eyes glistening, and I knew she finally saw the truth she had long avoided. Sophie's absence left a strange emptiness in the room, the kind that comes after a storm has passed and left wreckage behind. I could almost hear the echo of her arrogance fading, replaced by the memory of every sneer, every small cruelty she had delivered under the guise of charm. And yet, I felt no glee in her departure. This wasn't about humiliation. This was about justice, clarity, and finally reclaiming my dignity. The duplex, my home, was no longer a point of contention. It was a sanctuary I had fought for, a symbol of independence and strength. Eleanor stepped forward, her hand resting on mine. "You've earned this, Abigail. You've fought for every brick, every corner of this house. Never forget that. And remember, strength isn't in revenge. It's in standing firm, in protecting what is rightfully yours, and in refusing to let anyone take it from you." Her voice was calm but commanding, a soothing balm to the turmoil of the last few weeks. I nodded, my grip tightening on hers, drawing comfort and solidarity. She had been my anchor, the one who reminded me to trust my instincts, and her presence was a shield against the cruelty that had long sought to undermine me. I turned to my parents, my gaze unwavering. "I hope this moment teaches you something about fairness, integrity, and love," I said quietly but firmly. "Favoring one child over another may feel easy, but it leaves wounds that never heal. Family is about respect, trust, and honoring each other's efforts, not entitlement or manipulation. You cannot rewrite the past, but you can choose to do better. I will no longer be the one to carry the weight of your mistakes or your blind favoritism." Richard's jaw tightened, Martha's lips trembled, and I knew the words had landed, even if the change would take time. For the first time in years, the house felt entirely mine. The duplex was not just a property, but a testament to resilience, perseverance, and self-respect. Every corner I had restored, every late night spent painting and repairing, every dollar saved and invested, now belonged entirely to me and Eleanor. It wasn't just a home. It was proof that I could stand against intimidation, manipulation, and familial pressure. I realized that independence wasn't just financial. It was emotional, spiritual, and moral. And now, nothing could strip that from me. As Eleanor and I sat together in the quiet aftermath, I felt a profound sense of closure. "We did it," I whispered, more to myself than to her. She smiled softly, placing a hand over mine once more. "Yes, Abigail, and remember this. Power is not about dominance. It's about knowing your worth and never surrendering it." I exhaled, feeling the tension of months maybe years, leave my body. The family dinner that had begun with betrayal ended with clarity, truth, and the affirmation that I would never be sidelined again. I had reclaimed not just the duplex, but my dignity, my voice, and my power. In the quiet of the evening, I reflected on everything: my struggles, my perseverance, the manipulations of Michael and Sophie, and the silence of my parents when it mattered most. But the duplex was mine. Eleanor had reminded me that justice often comes quietly, through preparation, patience, and unwavering belief in oneself. And as I stood there, looking at the house bathed in the soft glow of sunset, I felt an inner certainty: family, independence, and the courage to defend what is rightfully yours are the strongest legacies one can claim. And for anyone listening to this story, remember, never let anyone diminish your worth, never let anyone take what is yours, and always fight for your dignity. Subscribe to the channel and join us, because every story like this deserves to be heard.